Hello, guys. So today we'll be discussing about one topic which kind of constantly irks a lot of medical students, and it did, annoy me to a certain extent. So the topic that we're discussing today is going to be about Coombs tests, because this is a little confusing to a lot of students. So let's just narrow it down. Now, normally you should understand that Coombs test is done. What's the goal of Coombs test? So if they ask, the goal of Coombs test is to detect antibodies against RBCs in human blood. So this is the basic idea behind, the basic goal that you have behind, Coombs testing. So why is Coombs testing done? If a patient comes to you with anemias, and if you sort of suspect the patient to be having hemolytic anemia, you are going to do a Coombs test, and that's to identify if the patient really has any anti-RBC antibodies. To give you, an idea here, what we will be looking forward to is, if imagine this is the RBC, we're looking forward to some of these things, something that sticks to this RBC and kills stuff. Makes it easy for the macrophages and the T cells to kill it. Now that's the basic of Coombs test. So you're trying to figure out whether these antibodies are present in the blood. Now, what do we have against these antibodies? Remember, these are IgG antibodies. Okay, these are IgG antibodies, anti-RBC IgG antibodies. Now, what we do in the patient is that we have two varieties of Coombs tests. What are those two varieties? So you have the direct Coombs test and the indirect Coombs test. So let's discuss what we're trying to talk about here. In the direct Coombs test, it's very easy. You take the patient's sample, and the patient's sample you have, you take the blood of the patient, in which you also have RBCs, and those RBCs will be having, these anti-RBC antibodies too attached. So what do you do actually? You use something called a Coombs reagent. That's the reason for the name of the test, Coombs reagent. And this Coombs reagent is nothing but it's an IgG antibody, right? It's an anti-IgG antibody. It's a strange thing. It's an antibody against an antibody. So remember, we saw these antibodies here, these antibodies. So against these antibodies, we have made antibodies. So these are human IgG antibodies. So these are the human IgG antibodies, and against these antibodies, we've developed antibodies. And what do we do here exactly is that as soon as we add the Coombs reagent into this particular system, these, let's imagine these are the new, the antibodies you have created. I'm gonna make an easy figure for you. So if this is a test tube, this is one RBC. These are those human test tube, those human anti-RBC antibodies, and then we add Coombs reagent, which is going to be these antibodies, these anti-IgG human IgG antibodies. They will go and stick to these antibodies. And they'll form clumps. There'll be another RBC close by here, which will be having the same thing, and then these, all of them, will polymerize together and they'll form clumps, and that will cause positive Coombs test. Now, this was very easy. You took the human blood sample, you put the Coombs reagent, and that's the end of story. When you talk about the indirect Coombs test, what you do in there is that you don't take the human blood sample, but you take the human serum sample. When you take the human serum sample, we must understand that there are no RBCs here. When there are no RBCs, what do? You take the sample, there is serum in this, but there are no RBCs. But what do we have here still is those anti-RBC human IgGs. Those are present in the serum. So what do we add? We add two things here. We add first the RBCs, and along with the RBCs, we add the Coombs reagent. And again, we see for the same reaction. So it's nothing. Basically, indirect means you're testing it at the serum instead of the blood sample, and you also add RBCs to the same, and you get the reaction positive if there are anti-RBC antibodies. Now that's all about the Coombs reagent, the Coombs test. Let me just show you a picture of this to make it much more clear. So if you look into this picture, you'll be able to understand much better what I'm talking about. This is the patient's blood, which has these anti-RBC antibodies just sticking to these RBCs. So what do? You take a sample of this, and then you add the anti-human globulin antibody, and they will sort of tend to agglutinate these, form these chunks of, RBCs. On the other hand, when you take an indirect antiglobin and indirect Coombs test, you only take the patient's serum, patient plasma with antibodies, whether you have the patient RBCs coded with it. So this is the blood sample, this is just the serum sample, and then the same test is followed. So that's the difference between, Coombs positive, Coombs negative. Coombs direct positive, indirect positive, whatever it is. Coombs positive means you have antibodies against the RBCs. Thank you.